Okay, great. Well, welcome to another great edition here of Account-Based Fridays. We got another terrific guest from Google this morning. Desiree Daniels joining us from the West Coast. Thank you for getting up so early, Desiree, and we'll give you a formal introduction in a moment. We start each week with a weekly poll, and we're actually going to dust off a poll from a few months back, mainly because we had the holiday last week, and with Desiree here from Google, we thought this one would be most appropriate. And this poll, we were asking about the strategies around what people were doing. And of course, we've got the limitations of the poll. I'm sure people are doing multiple versions of outreach. But the question was, what are you experiencing the most amount of success right now in terms of a strategy, one-to-one, one-to-few, and one-to-many? And the reason I had selected one-to-many, the particular segment that we're most focused in right now are typically SaaS-based companies that are high growth or maybe even hyper growth type companies where there's a lot of greenfield opportunity, and they're primarily pivoting from demand gen to an account-based strategy, which is why I focused on this. But Megan, I don't know, did you have any thoughts on this poll or what you're seeing in terms of trends?
Yeah, I feel like maybe the one-to-many outcome is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If we're used to doing one-to-many marketing, that's going to be the one that will feel the easiest to execute on, and will probably be the closest to the way that we're measuring already. So the results are going to be easier to measure and going to be, something that everyone can understand, right? Lead volume. But I'm glad to see that people are also having success almost as much with other styles of account-based, because clearly it should all be connected back to your go-to-market model, right? It depends on the kinds of accounts you're selling into, which one of these or combination of these you should be doing. And then it would depend, based on that, you would say you should see success in the one that's the closest match for the type of account that you're engaging. So yeah, I think actually this one was kind of interesting in that way. And I'm glad that people are trying, again, matching what they do in marketing to the way that they go to market as a business. That's definitely a key to success. But with that, Desiree, you have been on quite a journey with Google Cloud and really leading and instituting their account-based practice. Would be curious to get your take on this and your thoughts on sort of how ABM practices can evolve.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me, Megan and John. Really excited to be here this morning. Yes, so I run retail ABM for cloud. We are a verticalized account-based marketing team. So I have counterparts in FSI, healthcare, as well as telco and technology. And to be honest, we've had a few iterations of what ABM looks like at cloud. When I first joined, I was on a West regional team, and it was in the midst of COVID. So there was a lot that was changing within our organization. We were trying to balance how we keep customers engaged and win new business in a virtual environment. And I was hired to start what would be a foundation for ABM, and it was on a pretty small scale. I had 11 accounts. I was doing a combination of one-to-few programs and one-to-one. And then over time, our team kept growing. And now I'm under Akriti Gupta, and we are a more verticalized motion. So one-to-few, I'd say, is where we're seeing most of our success, especially with our partnership with sales and the BD function. And we still do one-on-one, but as we're growing so rapidly, we are hiring 4 ABMers to cover other industries right now. And that's where we can get the most scale. So we're also looking at what exists in our company from a content, from a subject matter expertise standpoint, and building multi-channel long-running programs.
That's really interesting. I mean, you were really the pioneer as the first hire into Google Cloud on the account-based strategy. I'm sure you've gone through a lot of iterations of account-based motions in current form today versus when you were the pioneer. What kind of lessons have you learned as part of that process, or what kind of mistakes did you make that you've learned from as part of that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we joke that we're on ABM 3.0 because we have gone through 3 separate versions of what ABM looks like. And a part of that is, first and foremost, when we think about like lessons is defining ABM as an organization. Cloud is a large business, as you know, and there were so many different aspects and parts of Google that were looking at ABM differently. So we had to start with, what does ABM actually mean? How do we want to define that as a practice? When we're thinking about a COE, how do we get those early buy-ins and relationships to really scale and evangelize what ABM can mean? And we didn't do it well in the beginning. There was a lot of things that we would change. And I would say not trying to scale too quickly, building that foundation, really making sure that we have a consensus of what ABM means internally, and really living by those principles as we start to introduce new sellers to what ABM is and our stakeholders as well. There's an education cross-functionally in marketing of how ABM can work and supplement the efforts that were already long running at Google Cloud.
What were some of the ways that you got to sort of make your case with sellers? What were some of the ways that you started to communicate and engage them to bring them on the journey with you and sort of win them over to the ABM cause, if you will?
Yeah, so I guess ABM 1.0 for me, when I first joined during COVID, 11 accounts, we were just pivoting to an all virtual world. And we were trying to bring subject matter experts to have peer-to-peer conversations and really just start with where we have relationships within sales, within our customers, and start to build around themes that unified all of those 11 accounts. So if it's, digital transformation or data or sustainability, how do we find like-minded subject matter experts or customers that are willing to speak and willing to get people together? And then over time, those quick wins were really important. Just getting people in the room and then slowly saying, well, how do we turn this into a longer running multi-channel program, knowing that sales is a little bit hesitant to what ABM can be, but they know that they like having customers and subject matter experts speak about things they care about.
Bring up an interesting point about sales, and we're seeing a lot of this right now where especially with everybody being at home, and you're probably an extreme with Google and being so digital, I would think, but the change management and introducing change or new processes or a new selling motion is pretty challenging. It's actually quite challenging. How did you kind of bring sales along in the journey to encourage them that this is the next way to sell and market from a process perspective?
Yeah. So before we get into the process perspective, I'd say that those quick wins and having buy-in cross-functionally was so important. Having those executive sponsors, we had folks like Paisley Tucker really helping us at the leadership level, try to educate and evangelize what ABM means in an organization of this size and how it can help sales. And a lot of our sellers came from organizations that had ABM as well. So they had, formed their own opinions for better or for worse about what ABM is. And that really helped, bring a lot of expertise in their specific functions to start saying, well, process-wise, how could we get something like ABM to work at Cloud? What are the things that don't work at Cloud today that need to slowly be changed and influenced? And that takes time. One thing, process-wise that comes to mind immediately is how we measure. So Cloud was not looking at ABM specific measurement, and that took time to start introducing those things into how we regularly report with leadership. MQLs, I think I saw a poll from B2B Fusion previously where they're like, is it leads? Do you have to give into leads sometimes? And as an ABM person, you want to say, no, we're not an MQL based function. That's not how we should operate. But in reality, when you're trying to win the respect and the rapport of sales, sometimes leads kind of sneak into those metrics in the beginning. And over time, you say, well, these leads are important, but let's talk about some of the account intelligence. How can we build that into our process and how we work with sales so they find that information super relevant And then our programs start to incorporate that as well. And then they have more of an appetite of measurement for ABM where they didn't before.
Yeah, so getting off the MQL treadmill takes time, it sounds like, but you've been able to do it. What do you find are some of the best ways to showcase the success that your team is having? And how are you highlighting some of those quick wins or longer term wins too? Like, what are the ways you communicate success internally?
Oh, I love this question. So I think it's ever evolving, and it's definitely something that it depends on who you talk to within the organization. So how we highlight some of those wins to marketing, sales may be caring about different aspects of those wins. So early days, it was how can we provide the right information, the right content, and the right experiences for sellers and their account teams in a relevant and long running fashion. For marketing, a lot of the roles are highly developed already, like demand gen, campaigns. How can we show them that partnership with ABM makes them more successful in their role and their stakeholders happy to partner with ABM? And that also relates to CDR, right? Can we show that when a CDR has an ABM person, and when I mean CDR, I'm talking about the business development organization, they're often measured on how they make account teams more effective. Can we prove that CDR is more effective when ABM is in their corner? So when we start to report on what those successes are, depends on the audience is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Go ahead, John.
Oh, I was just going to say, you've got a number of peers that are also kind of the vertical heads as well, which based on our other guests, that's an unusual setup, but a really encouraging one that the company's investing, all in on account-based motion. What's the conversation like with your peers in terms of either programs or successes or measurement? Like, how are you working with your peers that are also, the Desirees of their vertical market?
So very collaboratively. There are things at the center of excellence level that we want to share and understand, things that are working with their perspective industry. How can we have economies of scale? How can we optimize how we are building one to few programs? What's our template for workshopping one-on-one? There's a lot of things that we share cross industry. And then there are a lot of nuances that retail has compared to, my counterpart who is in healthcare life sciences. It is such a niche and bespoke practice of marketing that it requires that. But there are a lot of things that we have to build together in order for us to scale long term, especially since there's going to be, 5 of us in industry lead roles into next year. So that is how we will scale and grow, is leveraging those best practices with each other.
And thinking about sort of other functions within marketing, John, you mentioned in programs teams and things like that, but I'm wondering, are you able to get support from, say, content or enablement or other teams within marketing? How does that alignment work?
Great question. And it kind of reminds me of Hillary Carpio's presentation that she gave, where she talks about taking an audit of what exists and then also seeing where there's an opportunity to create customized content as it pertains to your area. And that's absolutely what we're doing. There's some fantastic functions at Cloud to help us with campaigns, with content, with events. And then what we're doing from an ABM perspective is focusing our attention, our data, and our funds on those very hyper bespoke content pieces, events around those tentpole moments. So let's give retail for an example. We're starting to see things like NRF come alive again after COVID, and we're planning peer-to-peer, very intimate discussions, content surrounding where we know Google is already going to be. So that's where we're focusing.
You must have some tremendous, or I would think relative to a lot of other companies, the digital capabilities that you have in terms of insights or analytics. You must, I would assume you'd have a lot of access to that. I don't know how that actually translates over into your day-to-day work. because in any big company, there's always the bureaucracy of moving information from point A to point B. But I guess my question on that is, how are you even using your own Google technology in an account-based motion that may even be relevant to some of the people that are on the call here, that, maybe we should be looking at things differently?
So on the data side, when it comes to Google, they're very conscientious on how, any data is used. There's a lot of protections in place for the end user and the customer. So in a way, there are some things that are, from an ABM perspective, not available to us because Google takes privacy so seriously, and they're very conscientious. But I will say, as an ABM organization, we've become a lot more thoughtful in how we look at data and how we're able to build, programs that are based on themes that identify with our customers in those clusters. So we're really thorough on how we look at sub-industry clusters. We try to keep those one to few programs to no more than 20 accounts. So we're seeing some of our clusters be as small as 11 accounts. So we're very niche and bespoke in how we build our data and how those empower those programs. But we also have a little bit of a hindrance in that they're so protective of data. We don't have access to everything, and we shouldn't, right? We should always have that protection in mind for end users and customers. But yes, we're very conscientious in how we have those empower the content and the experiences that our customers and our programs receive.
And I've put a note in chat, folks, if you have questions for Desiree, by all means, please jump in. I'll add one of my own. You mentioned you're sort of on ABM 3.0. What are some things you're thinking about trying out going into the next year? Anything new that you're testing, or any, changes in strategy, anything you can share with us?
Yeah. So a couple of things as we're looking into next year. I hate to, keep beating a dead horse, but COVID is an ever evolving situation. So we're definitely looking at a hybrid kind of model of, giving a little bit of something for everyone. So maybe there are folks that are still operating in a very digital world. And then we're on a case-by-case basis looking at what are the best in-person opportunities to get peers speaking together. We're scaling really quickly in that we're building out a ton of industry. So I will have more counterparts soon, which I'm really excited about. And it's leveraging those best practices and continuing to shape the organization to not only accept ABM, but maybe modify the way that they look at marketing, where ABM has a very strong seat at the table. So that's a few things that we're looking at for next year. ABM 2.0 was all about building the foundation, what the COE looks like, and 3.0 is bringing a lot of awesome expertise from different practitioners and building out the industries.
Yeah. And I see Lenice has raised her hand to ask a question. So I'll ask her to jump in. And then Joe, we've got a question from you in chat, but go ahead, Lenice.
Thanks, Meg. Hey, Desiree, really great information that you're providing here. And I had a question for you. Something that resonated that you said was you build a lot of themes around what the challenges are or what customers are going through. And then it helps you to create that bespoke either messaging, or you can have certain events where you're aggregating, people with a common challenge to have a discussion. What's your process? Can you talk to that more about how you collect that data? Because sometimes, whether you're looking at whatever CRM tool you have in place, it's like too much data. And how do you start to organize that? Who do you work with? Can you talk more to that process?
Yeah. So when we're looking at one to few specifically, we always start with, sales. Where are they seeing in the field certain topics that come up? Like, for example, retail is very concerned with sustainability. We're looking at the storefront of the future. So we definitely want to hear from sales on what they're hearing in field. We do have a tech stack that helps us with account intelligence. There's a few agencies that we work with that help us put together, as well as, some internal things as well that help us put together a very robust plan on how we look at those themes, how those industries can be broken into more digestible subclusters and then where those accounts fall. So for example, we have a program in retail that is around fashion. And we look at, not only what are the themes, but where do those accounts sit in those themes from a maturity standpoint? So if they're looking at sustainability or data, for example, there's varying stages in their journey with those topics. And it's about meeting them where they are and growing them over time. So a lot of the data that we work with in account intelligence to build those programs is exactly focused on where they are now and how we can build them over time. And it's not always about selling. A lot of times it's just helping them with their challenges and understanding the things that motivate them, not being a solution specific motion, but a problem specific motion. And then we start to see organically over time. And this is another one of those within an organization, you need to show that ABM is the long tail. There will be avenues that open up where we can be a support and a service to customers, knowing what their challenges are and helping them grow in their journey. And that takes time. So yes, I know I didn't get into too many specifics about tech stack and internal, but I hope that helps in how we look at the approach.
No, it's massively helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, Desiree, just to add on to what you were saying, makes a lot of sense. Process question, which is that your team that comes up with the themes, or do you involve product marketing? Like, do you rely on product marketing at Google to help you actually validate those themes, build messages, then deploy those? Or is that your team that hacks it out?
I love this question, and it might be a little controversial, but I will say I don't typically, and this is a personal opinion, I can't speak for everybody, but I typically do not want product from a solution perspective to lead the conversation with customers. I think that there's a very important point in our journey of building out those subclusters where product can help us with readiness and fit of our solutions on where those customers are in their journey, messaging, the development of where those products will be, so that if we're thinking about the long tail with some of these customers, where we will be able to have a clear path to support them. But typically our team is the one that says, what are we hearing in field? What is the data supporting? Where are we from a product perspective? And creating a message that is very customer specific. And when you look at one to few, it is a challenge to scale that level of personalization for everyone. And that's where those clusters come in, because we're saying, okay, 80% of the audience identifies with this. This last 20% is where we're getting really specific to those accounts and where they are in their journey, because there may be accounts in a list that are just thinking about digital transformation. And then there are those that are leading in their peer group. So I hope that helps. On the product side, massively important to how we're looking at ABM, but not driving those themes.
Okay, thank you.
It was a great question. And I 100% agree with you, Desiree, about try to keep product in their corner if you can, and away from the customers, at least on that messaging or that outreach. I think you being the spearhead is a wise move. And Joe asked a really important question here. So glad you asked this, Joe, about the balance, the delicate balance between quick wins and keeping an account engaged over a longer sales cycle. Like, how do you do that? I guess in two ways. One, how do you win the hearts and minds of non-sales executives? And then on the flip side, how do you win the hearts and minds of sales executives when you're looking at this longer sales cycle?
I love this question. And going back to the original poll of like where we're seeing more success, for me personally, I love to start in the middle of the ABM triangle with one to few, because if you start to see success in that, subcluster, you can tailor your strategy to support one-on-one accounts. And you can also take some of those learnings. And we work with another team that, covers more of that one-to-many motion and share some of those winnings. Like, it is almost the perfect incubation section in the ABM triangle to test, learn, and iterate. And you can hyper personalize for one-on-one or kind of scale it for one-to-many. I will say that when we're looking at, where I just went off on a whole tangent. John, what was the other part of the question? I got too excited.
I think you're doing great. Just winning the hearts and minds of the sales or non-sales execs and a quick wins versus non-quick wins. And it's just really, it's a really difficult challenge to kind of maintain the momentum of ABM because it's a long-term burn and people want everything yesterday. So like, how do you kind of engage on the quick win side?
Yes. So back to the one to few side, when we're looking at quick wins and we're looking at a small subset of accounts, if we start to see traction in one of those accounts in the clusters, sales typically talks. And if they're having success with ABM, that does kind of catch on like wildfire. I will say with one-on-one, some risks and learnings that I've seen is that it's hyper dependent on the one-on-one account's readiness. So if there isn't a good intersection for ABM, and that's where you really need to vet out which accounts you do one-on-one, because there may be, they want to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this account and they think ABM is one of those things, but you have to be very definitive on this makes a good ABM account and this doesn't. So when we're looking at quick wins, I like one to few because you're working with a subset of peers. You're doing activities to those small groups. It's a good petri dish. One-on-one, all of your eggs are in one basket. And if there's a sensitivity that comes up in that account, you may not be able to get as quick of a win. And that life cycle is probably a little bit longer than if you're planning for a group of peers, because you're kind of hedging your bet a little bit. There's probably going to be a few accounts in the run of that program that are going to have success early days and can start to influence the broader group as well.
Yeah, I love that. I always advise people never just start with one account. I like 3. That way, if something goes wrong in any one of the accounts, you're not like your whole program isn't out the window. And 2, like it's still 50-50 shot. I like 3. Like usually somebody's going to hit within a group of 3, but I like your one to few example very much. Well, I know that we are at time. Desiree, thank you so very much for joining us and waking up bright and early and giving us the benefit of your experience and wisdom and the program that you've built at Google Cloud. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you all for the questions. Feel free to reach out to me. I love discussing ABM, peer-to-peer. I learned something so much from this group of practitioners. So I'm really excited to keep the conversations going.
I just dropped your LinkedIn. You're going to get a bunch of LinkedIn invites now, Desiree, thanks to my promoting you, but really appreciate you engaging here. Great conversation. And next week, we've got another great conversation about events, hybrid events, remote events. Claudia Tarico, who heads Demand Gen Reports as the managing editor, runs regular events for her B2B group on best practices. And she'll be sharing some insights about what she's seeing with her, her own efforts in this area. So I think next week will be, hopefully can live up to this week's. This was phenomenal. So thank you again, Desiree.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.